A millionaire forced his son to marry a humble cleaning lady to teach him a lesson. However, he was left paralyzed by what his son did. The neon lights of Las Vegas pulsed like a dying heartbeat against the desert sky, casting their garish glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Bellagio's high-roller suite. Lucas Ellington stood at the edge of the 23rd floor, his reflection ghost-like in the glass, watching the city that never sleeps sprawl endlessly below him. At 28, he carried himself with the kind of casual arrogance that only came from a lifetime of privilege. Designer suit hanging perfectly on his lean frame, platinum watch catching the light as he raised another glass of Dom Pérignon to his lips. "Your move, Ellington," called Marcus Webb from the poker table behind him, his voice carrying that familiar mix of challenge and mockery that had been Lucas's soundtrack for the past 18 hours. Lucas turned slowly, his blue eyes scanning the faces around the green felt table. These weren't just any players. They were the sons of oil tycoons, tech moguls, and foreign dignitaries, men who measured their worth in billions and their losses in millions. Tonight, Lucas had been trying to prove he belonged among them, that he was more than just Frank Ellington's pampered heir. "All in," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the alcohol coursing through his veins. He pushed his remaining chips toward the center of the table, a mountain of black and purple tokens that represented more money than most people would see in a lifetime. The room went quiet except for the distant hum of slot machines and the soft jazz filtering through the sound system. Marcus's eyebrows shot up, and even Viktor Petrov, the Russian oil heir who'd been chain-smoking cigars all night, paused mid-puff. "You sure about that, pretty boy?" Marcus drawled, using the nickname that never failed to get under Lucas's skin. "That's what? 2 million sitting there. 2 million. The number hit Lucas like a physical blow, but he kept his expression neutral. $2 million. Money that meant nothing to his father, but everything to his own sense of independence. Money he'd been planning to use to finally break free from Frank Ellington's iron grip, to prove he could make it on his own terms. "I said all in," Lucas repeated, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The cards were revealed with theatrical flair. Marcus laid down a full house, kings over sevens, while Lucas stared at his own hand, a straight that had seemed so promising just moments before. The room erupted in a mix of sympathetic groans and barely concealed satisfaction. In the span of 30 seconds, Lucas had lost everything. "Better luck next time, Ellington," Marcus said, already signaling the dealer to rake in the chips. "Maybe Daddy will up your allowance." The words stung more than they should have. Lucas forced himself to stand calmly, to shake hands with the other players, to accept their condolences with the grace expected of a gentleman. But inside, something was crumbling. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the look in Marcus's eyes, the way Victor had smirked when the cards were turned, the knowledge that they'd all been waiting for this moment. He made it to his suite before the walls started closing in. The penthouse that had seemed so luxurious hours earlier now felt like a gilded cage. Lucas loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch with hands that barely trembled. A small victory in itself. Through the window, the strip continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, indifferent to his personal catastrophe. His phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. "Mr. Ellington Sr. requests your immediate return to Chicago. Flight leaves in 4 hours." Of course, Frank always knew. His father had built an empire on information, on knowing everything about everyone before they knew it themselves. Lucas could picture him now, sitting behind his mahogany desk in the Chicago penthouse office, those cold gray eyes calculating the exact cost of his son's failure. The flight back to Chicago passed in a blur of first-class service and mounting dread. Lucas nursed a single whiskey, forcing himself to think, to prepare. Frank Ellington didn't summon people. He commanded them. And when Frank was disappointed, the consequences were always swift and brutal. The Ellington building pierced the Chicago skyline like a steel and glass monument to ambition. Lucas had grown up in its shadow, literally and figuratively. As the private elevator carried him to the 42nd floor, he caught his reflection in the polished doors. Rumpled suit, hollow eyes, the look of a man who'd finally pushed his luck too far. Frank's office occupied the entire corner of the building, its windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the city that had made their family fortune. But Lucas barely noticed the view. His attention was fixed on the man behind the desk, Frank Ellington, 62 years old, and still radiating the kind of power that bent boardrooms to his will. $2 million, Frank said without looking up from the paper spread before him. His voice was quiet, conversational even, somehow. That made it worse. In a single night. Quite impressive. Even for you. It was my money, Lucas said, hating how defensive he sounded. Your money. Frank finally looked up, those gray eyes boring into his son. You've never earned $1 in your life, Lucas. Everything you have, everything you are, exists because I allow it. The words landed like physical blows. Lucas felt his hands clench into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to remain still. This was the dance they'd performed countless times. Frank's calculated cruelty met by Lucas's stubborn defiance. So what happens now? Lucas asked. You cut off my credit cards, reduce my allowance, ground me like I'm still 16? Frank stood slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, and for a long moment said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Lucas's stomach drop. You're going to get married. What? The word escaped before Lucas could stop it. Marriage, Lucas? That thing normal people do when they want to build a life together? Though in your case, it'll be more of a learning experience. I'm not marrying anyone, Lucas said, his voice rising. You can't just... Lauren Hayes, Frank continued as if Lucas hadn't spoken. 25 years old, works as a cleaning lady in this very building. Sweet girl, from what I'm told. Hardworking, exactly what you need. The room seemed to tilt around Lucas. A cleaning lady. You want me to marry a cleaning lady. I want you to learn what responsibility means, what sacrifice looks like, what it's like to care about someone other than yourself. Frank turned back to face his son, and Lucas saw something in those gray eyes he'd never seen before. Not anger, but cold, calculating disappointment. You'll marry Miss Hayes and remain married for 1 full year. No divorce, no separation. No running away to Europe or Asia or whatever playground catches your fancy. And if I refuse, Frank's smile was razor thin, then you're no longer my son. No trust fund, no inheritance, no family name to open doors. You'll be just another 28-year-old with expensive tastes and no way to pay for them. The ultimatum hung in the air between them like a guillotine blade. Lucas felt the familiar surge of rebellion, the urge to tell his father exactly where he could shove his demands. But underneath the anger was something else. Fear. Fear of a world without safety nets, without the Ellington name to smooth his path. This is insane, Lucas said finally. You can't force someone into marriage in the 21st century. I'm not forcing anyone, Frank replied smoothly. I'm offering Miss Hayes an opportunity she desperately needs, and I'm giving you a chance to finally grow up. What you do with those opportunities is entirely up to you. What kind of opportunity could a cleaning lady possibly need that badly? Frank's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. The kind that involves a 16-year-old sister with leukemia and medical bills that would bankrupt most families. The words hit Lucas like a physical blow. Suddenly, the game his father was playing came into sharp focus. Not just punishment, but manipulation on a level that took his breath away. Frank had found someone desperate enough to agree to this insanity. Someone with no choice but to play along. You bastard, Lucas whispered. I'm a businessman, Frank corrected, and you have 24 hours to decide. The wedding will take place this Friday, regardless of your answer. The only question is whether you'll be there to say, I do, or cleaning out your apartment because you no longer have one. As Lucas left the building, stepping out into the Chicago wind that cut through his expensive suit like it was paper, one thought echoed in his mind. His father had finally found the perfect cage, not bars of steel or concrete walls, but something far more insidious. A woman whose desperation matched his own, and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. The morning air carried the scent of autumn through Grant Park as Lauren Hayes hurried toward the Ellington building, her worn sneakers silent against the polished marble of the lobby. At 25, she moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd learned to navigate the world carefully. Avoiding attention while getting things done, her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her cleaning uniform, crisp despite being secondhand, bore the logo of Supreme Cleaning Services. She'd been working the night shift at Ellington Industries for 8 months now, arriving after the executives went home and leaving before they returned. It was honest work, and it paid enough to cover rent and groceries. though never quite enough for the mountain of medical bills that seemed to grow larger each month. "Lauren," called Maria Santos, the head of the cleaning crew, her accented voice echoing off the marble walls. "Mr. Peterson wants to see you in HR." Lauren's stomach dropped. Being called to human resources was never good news. Had someone complained about her work? Found out she'd been using the break room to study for her teaching certification? She'd been so careful to keep her head down, to be invisible. "Did he say why?" Lauren asked, trying to keep the worry out of her voice. Maria shrugged, but her dark eyes were sympathetic. "Just said to send you up. Don't look so scared, Mija. You're the best worker we have." The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal. Lauren stared at her reflection in the polished doors, smoothing down flyaway hairs and trying to calm her racing heart. She needed this job, desperately, with Nora's treatments getting more expensive and her insurance covering less each month. Losing this income would be catastrophic. The HR department was all glass and steel, modern furniture arranged to intimidate rather than comfort. James Peterson, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, gestured for her to sit across from his desk. "Lauren, thank you for coming up. I know this is unusual timing," he began, his voice gentle but formal. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever you decide, your job here is secure." The words should have been reassuring, but they only made Lauren more nervous. "Okay, are you familiar with Mr. Frank Ellington?" Everyone who worked in the building knew Frank Ellington, at least by reputation. The man who'd built this empire from nothing, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Lauren had seen him exactly twice. Once stepping out of his private elevator, once standing at his office window 42 floors above the city like some modern-day king surveying his domain. "Yes, sir. I know who he is." Peterson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Ellington has made a rather unusual request. He'd like to meet with you privately today." Lauren's mouth went dry. "Me? I don't understand. Have I done something wrong?" "No, nothing like that. In fact, quite the opposite. He specifically requested you. Said he'd been observing your work ethic. Look, Lauren, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know what this is about, but when Frank Ellington requests a meeting, people don't usually say no." 30 minutes later, Lauren found herself in the private elevator that led directly to the executive floor, her hands trembling slightly as she watched the numbers climb. She'd changed into the only nice outfit she owned, a simple black dress she'd bought for Nora's school events. But even that felt inadequate for wherever she was going. The elevator opened directly into Frank Ellington's office, and Lauren's breath caught. She'd never been anywhere like this. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that seemed to stretch forever, furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year, art on the walls that she recognized from museum postcards. "Miss Hayes?" Frank Ellington stood behind his desk, and even at 62, he commanded the room effortlessly. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his suit impeccable, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Lauren perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. Every instinct told her to be careful, that men like Frank Ellington didn't summon people like her without reason. "You're probably wondering why you're here," Frank said, settling back into his chair with the confidence of a man accustomed to controlling every conversation. "Yes, sir. I've been watching you, Miss Hayes. 8 months of watching you work with a dedication that's become increasingly rare. You arrive early, stay late, never complain. You help your colleagues when they're struggling, and you treat this building, my building, with respect." Lauren wasn't sure if she was supposed to respond, so she simply nodded. "Tell me about your sister." The question hit her like a physical blow. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sir, Nora, isn't it? 16 years old. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, diagnosed 18 months ago, currently undergoing her second round of chemotherapy at Northwestern Memorial." The room seemed to tilt around Lauren. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things, Miss Hayes, especially about people who work for me, people who might need help." Frank's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "The treatments are expensive. Your insurance covers perhaps 60% of the costs, leaving you with bills that would crush most families." Lauren's throat felt tight. She'd worked so hard to keep her personal life separate from work, to maintain the professional distance that jobs like hers required. Hearing her private struggles laid out so casually by this powerful man made her feel exposed, vulnerable. "I don't understand why you're telling me this," she managed to say. "Because I have a proposition for you, one that could solve your financial problems permanently." Frank stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Lauren found herself holding her breath. "My son Lucas is troubled, privileged, spoiled, lacking in character and responsibility. Last night he lost $2 million gambling in Las Vegas. $2 million, Miss Hayes. Money that could save dozens of lives like your sister's, wasted on cards and ego." Lauren's mind reeled. $2 million. She couldn't even fully comprehend that amount of money. "I've decided that Lucas needs to learn some hard lessons about life, about sacrifice, about caring for someone other than himself, and I believe you're exactly the person to teach him those lessons." "I don't understand." Frank turned back to face her, his gray eyes intense. "I want you to marry my son." The words hit Lauren like a physical blow. She gripped the arms of her chair, certain she'd misheard. "Excuse me. A marriage contract. 1 year, legally binding. In exchange, I will cover all of your sister's medical expenses, past, present, and future. I'll also pay you a salary of $50,000 for your services as my son's wife." Lauren's head spun. Marriage. To Lucas Ellington, the man she'd seen exactly once, stepping out of his Porsche in the parking garage like he owned the world. The idea was insane, impossible. And yet, all of Nora's medical bills, she whispered, every single one. The experimental treatments her doctors have mentioned but deemed too expensive. The best specialist in the country, whatever she needs. Lauren closed her eyes, trying to think clearly. This was crazy. People didn't just marry strangers, not even for amounts of money that could change everything. But then she thought of Nora, pale and thin in her hospital bed, trying to smile through the pain of chemotherapy. Nora, who'd never had a chance to be a normal teenager because of the cancer that was slowly stealing her life. What would be expected of me? You would live as Lucas's wife for 1 year, attend social functions, present a united front to the public and media, help him learn responsibility, empathy, the value of hard work. Think of it as intensive education for a very spoiled student. And Lucas, does he know about this? Frank's smile was cold. Lucas is learning that actions have consequences. He can either marry you and begin growing up, or he can forfeit his inheritance and learn what the real world is like without the Ellington name to protect him. Lauren felt sick. This wasn't a marriage proposal. It was emotional blackmail on multiple levels. Frank was using her desperation to control his son, and using his son's dependence to force a decision that benefited no one except his own sense of control. But Nora's face flashed in her mind again. Nora, who'd whispered just last week that she was tired of fighting. Tired of being sick, Nora, who deserved every chance at life that money could buy. "I need time to think about this," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, but not too much time. Lucas has until tomorrow to decide, and your answer affects his choice significantly. The wedding would take place this Friday. This Friday. 4 days away." Lauren's mind reeled at the speed of it all, the way her entire life could change in less than a week. As if reading her thoughts, Frank added, "Sometimes, Miss Hayes, life presents us with opportunities that seem impossible, but are actually inevitable. I believe this is one of those moments for both you and my son." Lauren stood on unsteady legs. Frank's business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline, or a death sentence, as the elevator carried her back down to reality. She stared at her reflection in the polished doors and saw a stranger looking back, a woman about to make a deal with the devil himself, all for love of a sister who didn't even know the price being paid for her life. Outside the building, Chicago's autumn wind cut through her thin jacket, but Lauren barely felt the cold. She had a choice to make, one that would either save her sister's life or destroy her own, and she had less than 24 hours to decide which was more important. The Cook County Courthouse felt like a mausoleum on Friday morning, its gray stone walls echoing with the footsteps of people whose lives were being legally rearranged. Lauren Hayes stood in the hallway outside Judge Morrison's chambers, her her hands smoothing the simple cream-colored dress she'd bought with money she couldn't afford to spend. It was the nicest thing she'd ever owned, and it still felt inadequate for what was about to happen. Lucas Ellington leaned against the opposite wall, checking his phone with the kind of casual indifference that made Lauren's stomach clench. He looked like he was waiting for a business meeting rather than his own wedding. Charcoal suit perfectly tailored, dark hair styled with careless precision, blue eyes cold as winter sky. When their eyes met briefly, his expression was unreadable, but Lauren caught something that might have been resentment flickering beneath the surface. They hadn't spoken since Frank had introduced them 3 days ago in his office. That meeting had lasted exactly 15 minutes, long enough for Lucas to look her up and down like she was a piece of furniture he was being forced to accept, and for Lauren to realize that her new husband-to-be despised everything this arrangement represented. "The judge is ready for you," announced the court clerk. A middle-aged woman whose matter-of-fact tone suggested she'd seen stranger things than a rushed marriage between obvious strangers. The ceremony took 12 minutes. Lauren knew because she found herself staring at the clock on Judge Morrison's wall, counting the seconds until her life would be irrevocably changed. Lucas answered, "I do," in a voice that could have been ordering coffee, while Lauren's own response came out as barely a whisper. There were no rings. Frank had handled even that detail, producing simple gold bands that felt like shackles on Lauren's finger. The ride to the Ellington estate passed in silence. Lauren stared out the window of Lucas's Porsche, watching the city give way to the manicured lawns and imposing gates of Lincoln Park's most exclusive neighborhood. When they pulled through wrought iron gates that probably cost more than her annual salary, Lauren felt her last connection to her real life snap like a broken thread. The mansion rose before them like something from a magazine. 3 stories of pale stone and gleaming windows, surrounded by gardens that belonged in a museum. Lauren had cleaned office buildings for years, but she'd never seen wealth displayed so casually, so effortlessly. "Welcome to your new prison," Lucas said. His first words to her all day. His tone was bitter, but Lauren caught something else underneath, a weariness that suggested he felt just as trapped as she did. The next 3 weeks passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Lucas treated her with the kind of cold politeness usually reserved for unwelcome houseguests, speaking to her only when absolutely necessary, and making it clear that she was an unwelcome intruder in his world. He showed her to a guest bedroom down the hall from his own suite, handed her a credit card for expenses, and then proceeded to pretend she didn't exist. Lauren tried to make herself useful, but the house already had a full staff who regarded her with barely concealed confusion. She wasn't the lady of the house. Lucas made that clear through his indifference. But she wasn't staff either. She existed in a strange limbo, rattling around rooms that were larger than her entire apartment had been. The first social event was a charity gala at the Palmer House, and Lucas used it as an opening shot in what would become their Cold War. He introduced her to Chicago's elite with a tone that managed to be both polite and insulting. "This is Lauren, my wife. She used to clean our offices, actually. Fascinating how life works out, isn't it?" Lauren felt the stares, heard the whispered conversations that followed them around the ballroom. She was the cleaning lady who'd somehow trapped a billionaire's son. At least, that's what their expressions suggested. But instead of shrinking away, something inside Lauren straightened. She'd survived 18 months of watching her sister fight cancer. She could survive a few judgmental looks from people who'd never worked a real day in their lives. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I found the work very educational. You learn a lot about people from what they leave behind in their offices. Their real priorities, their character, or lack thereof." Lucas shot her a sharp look, surprised by her response. He'd expected her to be embarrassed, to play the grateful peasant who knew her place. Instead, she met his challenge with quiet dignity that left him slightly off balance. The second event was worse. A gallery opening where Lucas made sure to mention her background to anyone who would listen, painting her as a gold digger who'd gotten lucky. But Lauren had grown up defending herself and Nora against a world that looked down on them for being poor, for being alone, for being vulnerable. She knew how to stand her ground. "Lucas is absolutely right," she told Mrs. Patricia Westbrook, one of Chicago's most notorious gossips. When the woman made a snide comment about sudden elevation in social status, "I did clean offices, 8 months of it actually. And in those 8 months, I worked harder than most people do in years. I earned every dollar, every opportunity. It's amazing how much respect you gain for honest work when you've actually done some. Mrs. Westbrook's face flushed red, and Lucas stared at Lauren with something that might have been surprise or grudging respect. But it was the third week that changed everything. Lauren had fallen into a routine of visiting Northwestern Memorial every other day, sitting with Nora during her treatments, trying to pretend that everything was normal, even though her sister was too smart not to notice the changes, the designer clothes, the car service, the careful way Lauren avoided talking about her living situation. "You married him, didn't you?" Nora said on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice weak from the latest round of chemotherapy, but her eyes still sharp. "The rich guy. That's why my treatment suddenly got upgraded to the fancy wing." Lauren's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She'd been so focused on surviving Lucas's hostility that she'd almost forgotten why she was there, what this was really about. Nora looked so small in the hospital bed, pale and thin but still trying to protect her older sister from worry. "Nora, I'm not stupid, Lauren. I know what our insurance covers, and I know what this room costs. I know you've been working yourself to death trying to pay for everything." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have to sacrifice your life for mine. You're not a sacrifice," Lauren said fiercely, taking her sister's hand. "You're everything. You're the only family I have, the only person who matters. If I have to play dress up and pretend to be married to some spoiled rich boy for a year to keep you alive, then that's what I'll do, and I'll do it gladly." That was when she noticed him. Lucas Ellington stood in the doorway of Nora's room, apparently having arrived to find his wife for some social obligation or another, but instead of the cold indifference she'd grown accustomed to, his expression was something else entirely. He was staring at Lauren and Nora with an intensity that made her stomach flutter uncomfortably. He'd heard everything. For a long moment, the three of them existed in a bubble of silence. Then Lucas stepped back into the hallway without a word, and Lauren knew that something fundamental had shifted. He'd seen her not as the gold digger his father had manipulated into his life, but as someone who'd made an impossible choice for love. When she found him in the hospital corridor 20 minutes later, he was staring out a window at the Chicago skyline, his expression unreadable. "She's beautiful," he said without turning around. "Your sister. She has your eyes." "Lucas, I heard what you said to her, about sacrificing your life." He finally looked at her, and Lauren was surprised to see something like pain in his blue eyes. "I've been a complete bastard to you. You have every right to be angry," Lauren said quietly. "This isn't exactly a normal situation for either of us." Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Normal, right? Nothing about my life has been normal for years. My father's been manipulating me since I could walk, and I've been too proud or too stupid to see it. But this," he gestured between them, "this is a new low, even for him. The year will pass quickly," Lauren said, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. "Then you can go back to your life, and I can go back to mine." "Can you?" Lucas asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Can either of us really go back after this?" It was a question that would haunt Lauren for weeks to come, because standing there in that hospital corridor, looking at this man who'd been nothing but cruel to her for 3 weeks, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like understanding. Lucas Ellington wasn't the villain in this story. He was just another person caught in Frank Ellington's web, struggling against bonds he couldn't break. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Lauren wondered if maybe, just maybe, they were on the same side after all. As they walked back to the car together, their silence was different. Not the Cold War of the past weeks, but something more complicated. Something that felt like the beginning of a truce neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. The truce between Lucas and Lauren began with small things. A cup of coffee left on the kitchen counter with her name written on the cup in Lucas's precise handwriting. A quiet "good morning" when they passed in the hallway. The absence of cutting remarks when they attended their mandatory social functions together. It wasn't friendship. It was barely civility. But it was better than the Cold War that had defined their first month of marriage. Lauren had fallen into a routine that kept her sane. Mornings at the Ellington mansion. Afternoons at the hospital with Nora. Evenings at whatever social obligation Frank's schedule demanded. The rest of her time she spent at Lincoln Elementary, a struggling school on Chicago's South Side where she volunteered as a reading tutor. It was the one place where she could still be herself, where Lauren Hayes mattered more than Mrs. Lucas Ellington. She'd been careful to keep that part of her life separate. Lucas knew she went somewhere most afternoons. The GPS and the car service Frank had assigned her made privacy impossible, but he'd never asked questions, which was why she was shocked to find him standing in the school's main hallway on a gray October afternoon, looking as out of place as a peacock in a henhouse. "What are you doing here?" Lauren asked, stopping short in the doorway of her classroom. Behind her, 15 third graders were putting away their books, their voices a cheerful cacophony of childhood chatter. Lucas turned, and Lauren was struck by how different he looked. Not the perfectly groomed heir she'd grown accustomed to, but someone younger, more uncertain. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly mussed, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "I needed to see you," he said, his voice quieter than usual, and this seemed like neutral territory. "Miss Lauren," called Malik, a 7-year-old with gap-toothed grin and more energy than the law should allow. "Is that your husband? He's really tall." Lauren felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd mentioned being married in passing, but had deliberately kept details vague. These kids didn't need to know about the complicated reality of her situation. "Yes, Malik, this is Lucas." She looked back at her unexpected visitor. "Lucas, would you like to meet my students?" What followed was perhaps the most surreal 20 minutes of Lauren's life. Lucas Ellington, heir to a billion-dollar empire, man who'd never worked a day he didn't choose to, sat cross-legged on a kindergarten-sized carpet while 15 children peppered him with questions ranging from, "Do you have a dog?" to, "Why are your shoes so shiny?" And he answered them, not with the condescending tone adults often used with children, but with genuine attention. When 7-year-old Aisha asked if he knew how to read, he picked up a picture book and began reading aloud in different voices for each character. When Marcus asked if he'd ever been poor, Lucas paused for a long moment before saying, "No, but I'm learning that being rich and being happy aren't the same thing." Lauren watched from the doorway, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. This wasn't the Lucas she knew, the bitter, entitled man who treated their marriage like a prison sentence. This was someone softer, more human, someone who looked at these children like they mattered. After the kids were picked up by parents and older siblings, Lauren and Lucas found themselves alone in the empty classroom. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across the colorful bulletin boards and tiny desks. "They're amazing," Lucas said, running his hand through his hair. "Those kids, they're so hopeful, even the ones who clearly don't have much." "They are amazing," Lauren agreed, beginning to erase the day's lesson from the whiteboard. "That's why I come here. They remind me that the world isn't all hospitals and mansions and people who measure worth by bank account balances." Lucas was quiet for a moment, watching her clean up with the efficient movements of someone who'd been taking care of others her whole life. "Is this what you want to do? Teaching?" "I have a degree in elementary education," Lauren said without turning around. "I finished it while working nights and taking care of Nora. I'd planned to apply for a full-time position here. Actually, before," she gestured vaguely, encompassing their entire situation, "before my father trapped you in his sick game." Lauren turned to look at him then, surprised by the bitterness in his voice. "Lucas, I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital, about sacrificing your life for Nora's, and I realized something." Lucas stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the school's small playground. "I've been so angry about this whole situation that I never really thought about what it cost you. Not just your freedom, but your dreams, your real life." "It's only a year," Lauren said, though the words felt hollow even to her. "Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've given up everything that matters to you. Your apartment, your job, your plans. And for what? To play house with someone who's treated you like garbage because he was too proud to admit his father had outmaneuvered him again." There was something raw in Lucas's voice that made Lauren's chest tighten. She'd grown used to his anger, his coldness, even his calculated cruelty. But this vulnerability, was new and somehow more dangerous than all the rest. "Why are you here, Lucas, really?" He was quiet for so long that Lauren thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I found you crying." Lauren's blood went cold. "What? 2 nights ago, I got home late from that meeting with the investors, and I heard something from your room. He turned to face her, his blue eyes haunted. I listened at your door like some kind of stalker, and you were crying, really crying, like your heart was breaking. And I realized that in 6 weeks of marriage, I'd never once asked if you were okay. The memory hit Lauren like a physical blow. Tuesday night, after a particularly brutal day at the hospital where Nora had been so sick from the chemotherapy that she couldn't keep anything down, Lauren had held it together all day, through the doctor's careful explanations and Nora's whispered fears. But once she was alone in her bedroom at the mansion, the facade had crumbled. I was having a bad day, Lauren said, her voice carefully neutral. Because of Nora. Because of everything. The words escaped before she could stop them. Because I'm 25 years old, and I'm living a lie in a house that will never be home, married to a man who barely tolerates my existence, pretending to be someone I'm not every single day, because my sister is dying, and the only way I can save her is to sell my soul to your father because I miss my life. My real life, even though it was hard and I never had enough money and I was always tired. Lucas stared at her, and Lauren realized she was shaking. All the emotions she'd kept buried for weeks were suddenly there, raw and exposed, and she couldn't take them back. I never asked to be rescued, she continued, the words tumbling out now. I never wanted to be anyone's charity case or life lesson. I just wanted to save my sister and go back to teaching kids and living in my tiny apartment where everything made sense. Lauren, and the worst part is that it's working. Nora's getting better. The treatments are helping. The doctors are optimistic, and I should be grateful. I should be thankful to you and your father for making it possible. But instead, I just feel angry all the time. Angry and guilty and lost. The silence that followed felt enormous. Lauren stared at the floor, horrified by her outburst but unable to regret it. She was so tired of pretending, so exhausted by the constant performance their marriage required. You're not a charity case, Lucas said finally, his voice soft. And you're not a life lesson. He paused, searching for words. You're the first real person I've met in years. Everyone else in my life wants something from me. Money, connections, access to my father's empire. But you'd walk away tomorrow if it wouldn't hurt Nora. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever given me. Lauren looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. For a moment, she saw past the privilege and the anger to something that looked almost like loneliness. I'm sorry, Lucas said, and the words seemed to surprise him as much as they surprised her, for how I've treated you, for making this harder than it had to be, for being so caught up in my own anger that I forgot you were trapped in this just as much as I was. Lucas, let me finish. He moved closer, close enough that Lauren could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes. I can't change what my father did to both of us. I can't give you back your life, or make this situation any less insane, but I can stop being such a bastard about it. I can try to make this year bearable for both of us. Lauren felt something inside her chest crack open. Just a little. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But something that might grow into it given time. The kids liked you, she said quietly. Lucas's mouth curved into the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. They liked me better than most adults do. Probably because they don't know how much money I have. Money doesn't impress 7-year-olds. No, but kindness does. And you have more of that than anyone I've ever met. Lauren felt tears prick at her eyes. But for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of frustration or grief. They were something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The change between Lucas and Lauren didn't happen overnight. It began with small gestures. Lucas asking about Nora's treatment when Lauren returned from the hospital. Lauren leaving a cup of coffee by his study when she noticed him working late. The mansion, which had felt like a mausoleum for weeks, slowly started to feel less hostile. It was during the 3rd week of November that their real conversations began. Lauren had always been a light sleeper, a leftover habit from years of listening for Nora's coughs in the night, ready to rush her to the emergency room at the first sign of trouble. The Ellington mansion, for all its luxury, was not a quiet place. The old radiators clanked, the wind rattled the tall windows, and the house itself seemed to settle and sigh like something alive. She'd been lying awake for an hour, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about the conversation she'd had with Nora's doctor that afternoon. Good news. Mostly, the latest round of treatments was working better than expected. But Dr. Martinez had also mentioned the possibility of a bone marrow transplant if Nora's remission didn't hold, and the thought made Lauren's stomach clench with renewed anxiety. A soft sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate but quiet, moving past her door toward the stairs. Lauren checked her phone. 2:17 a.m. Who would be walking around the house at this hour? Curiosity won over caution. Lauren slipped on her robe and crept to her door, opening it just enough to peek into the hallway. The corridor was empty, but she could see light spilling from the direction of the kitchen downstairs. She found Lucas sitting at the massive granite island in the center of the kitchen. A glass of what looked like whiskey in front of him, and his laptop open to what appeared to be financial documents. He'd changed out of his usual perfectly pressed clothes into jeans and a Northwestern University sweatshirt that made him look younger, more approachable. Couldn't sleep either, Lauren asked softly. Not wanting to startle him, Lucas looked up, and Lauren was struck by how tired he looked. Not just physically tired, but emotionally exhausted in a way she recognized from her own mirror. Sorry, did I wake you? I tried to be quiet. You didn't wake me, I was already up. Lauren gestured toward the kettle on the stove. Mind if I make some tea? Go ahead. There's probably some fancy stuff in the cabinet. My father has particular tastes about everything, including tea. As Lauren moved around the kitchen, she was hyper-aware of Lucas watching her. It was strange, this domesticity between them. For 2 months, they'd been like polite strangers sharing a house. Now, in the quiet darkness of the middle of the night, something felt different. What are you working on? Lauren asked, settling onto the stool across from him with her steaming mug. Lucas glanced at his laptop screen, then back at her, trying to figure out if there's any way to make this company actually mean something instead of just generating profit for the sake of profit. What do you mean? Ellington Industries? My father built it to be efficient, profitable, ruthless. But what does it actually contribute to the world? We buy companies, strip them down, sell off the pieces, and move on. We don't create anything. We don't help anyone. We just consume. There was a bitterness in Lucas's voice that Lauren had never heard before. Not the petulant anger of a spoiled rich kid, but something deeper. Disillusionment, maybe even shame. Is that what you want to do? Take over the company? Lucas laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't know what I want to do. I've spent my entire life being groomed for something I'm not sure I even believe in. My father has a plan for everything. My education, my career, my future, even my marriage, apparently. Lauren winced at the reference to their situation, but Lucas didn't seem to notice. What about you? He asked, taking a sip of his whiskey. Before all this, what did you dream about? The question caught Lauren off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her about her dreams, rather than her responsibilities. I wanted to open my own school, she said quietly. Not just teach in one, but actually create something from the ground up. A place where kids who come from situations like Nora and I did could get the kind of education that usually only rich kids receive. Small classes, individual attention, programs that actually prepare them for college, and careers that could change their lives. That sounds incredible. Why didn't you pursue it? Lauren looked down at her tea, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. Dreams are expensive, and when your sister gets cancer at 14, dreams become luxuries you can't afford. The silence that followed was comfortable rather than awkward. Lucas seemed to be processing what she'd said, and Lauren found herself studying his profile in the soft kitchen lighting. Without the armor of his perfect clothes and carefully controlled expressions, he looked different, more human. I used to want to be a teacher too, Lucas said suddenly. Lauren looked up, surprised. Really? High school history. I was obsessed with World War II when I was a kid. Not the battles and the strategy, but the stories of regular people who found themselves in extraordinary circumstances. People who had to choose between safety and doing the right thing. He smiled ruefully. My father put an end to that fantasy pretty quickly. Said teaching was for people who couldn't succeed in the real world. That's not true, isn't it? Look at you. Brilliant, dedicated, clearly gifted with kids. And you're stuck cleaning offices at night because teaching doesn't pay enough to cover medical bills. The words stung because they were true, but also because of the way Lucas said them. Not with condescension, but with genuine anger on her behalf. The system is broken, Lauren agreed. But that doesn't mean teaching isn't important. Those kids at Lincoln Elementary, they're going to change the world someday. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. And the difference between them making it and falling through the cracks might be whether someone believed in them when they were 7 years old. Lucas stared at her with an intensity that made Lauren's cheeks warm. You really believe that? I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? They talked until almost 4 a.m, about Lucas's complicated relationship with his father, about Lauren's fears for Nora's future, about the strange limbo their marriage had created in both their lives. Lucas told her about the pressure of being Frank Ellington's heir, the way every decision was scrutinized and criticized, the impossible standard he'd never been able to meet. Lauren shared stories about Nora, not just the illness, but the bright, funny, impossibly brave girl who'd kept Lauren sane through the darkest periods of their lives. She sounds amazing, Lucas said, when Lauren finished telling him about Nora's determination to finish her junior year of high school. Despite missing months of classes for treatment, she's stronger than I could ever be. I doubt that, Lucas said softly. You've kept your family together, sacrificed your dreams, married a stranger, and you're still fighting for what matters to you. That takes a kind of strength most people never develop. Lauren felt something flutter in her chest at the way he was looking at her, not with pity or admiration for her noble sacrifice, but with something that looked almost like respect. What happens when the year is up? Lucas asked suddenly. The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. It was something they'd both been carefully avoiding, the inevitable end date of their arrangement. I don't know, Lauren said honestly. I go back to my life, I suppose. Try to rebuild what I gave up. And us. This. He gestured between them, encompassing the late-night conversation, the gradual thaw in their relationship. I don't know that either. Lucas nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. For what it's worth, I'm glad we stopped being enemies. We were never really enemies, Lauren said. We were just two people trapped in an impossible situation, taking our anger out on each other instead of the person who actually deserved it. My father, your father. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of unspoken truth settling between them. Lauren found herself studying Lucas's hands where they rested on the granite countertop. Strong, elegant, unmarked by the kind of work that had calloused her own fingers. But there was something vulnerable about the way he held them, slightly curved as if he was protecting something fragile. I should let you get some sleep, Lauren said finally, standing to rinse her mug in the sink. Lauren? Lucas's voice stopped her at the kitchen doorway. Yeah, thank you for tonight for listening. It's been a long time since I had someone to talk to who didn't want something from me. Lauren's heart did something complicated in her chest. You too, good night, Lucas. As she made her way back upstairs, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Not love. It was too early and too complicated for that. But something that might grow into friendship, given time. Something that made the thought of their eventual separation feel less like relief and more like loss. Behind her, the kitchen light stayed on for a long time. December arrived in Chicago with the kind of bitter cold that made even short walks feel like an endurance test. Lauren had grown accustomed to the rhythm of her new life. Morning coffee with Lucas in the kitchen, afternoons at the hospital or the elementary school, evenings at whatever social function Frank's calendar demanded. The hostility between her and Lucas had transformed into something warmer, more genuine. Their late-night conversations had become a regular occurrence, creating an intimacy that neither of them wanted to examine too closely, which made the phone call from Dr. Martinez all the more devastating. Lauren was sitting in Nora's hospital room, helping her sister with calculus homework. Nora's determination to stay current with her classes never ceased to amaze her. When Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway with the expression Lauren had learned to dread, the careful neutrality that meant bad news was coming. Miss Hayes, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Lauren's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady for Nora's sake. Of course, Nora. I'll be right back. In the hallway. Dr. Martinez didn't waste time with pleasantries. The latest scans show some concerning developments. Nora's white cell count has spiked again, And there are some irregular readings that suggest the current treatment protocol isn't working as well as we'd hoped. The words hit Lauren like physical blows. What does that mean? It means we need to move more aggressively. There's a specialist at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Sarah Chen, who's pioneered a new combination therapy that's shown remarkable results with cases like Nora's, but Dr. Martinez paused, and Lauren knew what was coming. It's experimental. Insurance won't cover it. And the cost? How much? Approximately $400,000. That's not including the extended hospital stay, follow-up treatments, or potential complications. Lauren felt the world tilt around her. $400,000, even with Frank's agreement to cover Nora's medical expenses. That seemed impossible. She'd assumed his promise covered conventional treatments, not experimental procedures that cost more than most people's houses. How long do we have to decide? I'd like to start as soon as possible. Dr. Chen has an opening in her schedule next week, but she'll need confirmation by Friday. Lauren nodded numbly, her mind already racing. 3 days. She had 3 days to figure out how to ask Frank Ellington for nearly $500,000 for a treatment that might not even work. When she returned to Nora's room, her sister took one look at her face and set aside her textbook. How bad is it this time? Lauren had always been honest with Nora about her condition. Her sister was too smart and too strong to be protected with lies. But this felt different. More desperate. There's a new treatment, a specialist in Baltimore who might be able to help. Expensive specialist. Lauren's silence was answer enough. Nora closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked every one of her 16 years instead of the ancient wisdom that illness had forced upon her. Lauren, maybe it's time to... No. Lauren's voice was fierce. Don't you dare finish that sentence. We're going to fight this, whatever it takes. But as Lauren drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, doubt gnawed at her. What if Frank refused? What if he decided that experimental treatments weren't part of their deal? What if she'd sacrificed her life for a year, only to lose Nora anyway? She found Lucas in his study, papers spread across his desk and his laptop open to what looked like architectural plans. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his expression immediately shifted to concern. What's wrong? Lauren had planned to keep this to herself until she'd figured out how to approach Frank. But the events of the day had left her emotionally raw. Before she could stop herself, the whole story came tumbling out. Dr. Martinez's diagnosis, the experimental treatment, the impossible cost. Lucas listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When Lauren finished, he was quiet for a long moment. $400,000, he said finally. I know it's a lot. I know Frank never agreed to cover experimental treatments. But she's 16, Lucas. She should be worried about prom and college applications, not whether she's going to live to see her next birthday. Lucas stood up from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked the mansion's perfectly manicured grounds. You're going to ask my father for the money. It wasn't a question, but Lauren answered anyway. I have to. It's the only option. He'll use it against you. Find some way to extend the contract. Add conditions. Make you pay for his generosity in ways you can't imagine. Lauren's heart sank because she knew Lucas was right. Frank Ellington never did anything without calculating the advantage it would give him. Then what choice do I have? Lauren asked, her voice breaking slightly. Let my sister die because I'm afraid of what your father might demand in return. Lucas turned back to face her, and something in his expression made Lauren's breath catch. There was a determination there, a resolve she'd never seen before. You don't ask him, Lucas said quietly. I'll take care of it. Lucas, no. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. He moved closer, close enough that Lauren could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes. $400,000. It's nothing to me, Lauren. Less than what I lost in Vegas, and infinitely more important. Lauren felt tears prick at her eyes. Why would you do that? Because Nora matters to you. And you. Lucas paused, as if the words were difficult to say. You matter to me. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Lauren wasn't sure she was ready to cross. In the months since their marriage, she'd grown to respect Lucas, even to care about him. But this felt like something more dangerous. I can't let you do that, Lauren said, though her voice lacked conviction. Yes, you can, and you will, because this isn't about pride or independence or what you think you owe me. This is about saving your sister's life." Before Lauren could argue further, Lucas was already reaching for his phone. "Dr. Sarah Chen at Johns Hopkins. I'll have my assistant contact her office first thing in the morning. The money will be transferred by Wednesday." Lucas, "No conditions," he said. "Conditions," anticipating her concern. "No strings attached, no favors owed. This is separate from everything else, from our arrangement, from my father, from whatever this is between us. This is just one person helping another because it's the right thing to do." Lauren stared at him, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude and something else she wasn't ready to name. Lucas Ellington, the man she'd married out of desperation, the man who'd treated her with such cold indifference for months, was offering to save her sister's life without asking for anything in return. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to thank me, just..." Lucas's voice grew softer. "Just let me do this one good thing. Let me prove that I'm capable of being better than the person my father raised me to be." That night, as Lauren lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. It wasn't gratitude, though she felt that too, overwhelming and humbling. It was something else, something that felt dangerously like the beginning of love. The realization terrified her. This was supposed to be temporary, a business arrangement with an end date. She wasn't supposed to fall for her fake husband, wasn't supposed to care about what happened to him when their year was up. But as she thought about the look in Lucas's eyes when he'd offered to pay for Nora's treatment, not the calculated charity of the wealthy, but something raw and genuine, Lauren knew it was too late for those kinds of warnings. 3 days later, they were on a plane to Baltimore. Lucas had insisted on coming with them, claiming he had business on the East Coast anyway, but Lauren suspected the truth was simpler. He wanted to be there for her, wanted to see this through. Dr. Chen was everything Dr. Martinez had promised. Brilliant, direct, and cautiously optimistic about Nora's chances. The experimental protocol would be grueling, 6 weeks of intensive treatment followed by months of monitoring, but the preliminary results were encouraging. As they sat in the Hopkins waiting room while Nora underwent her initial consultation, Lucas reached over and took Lauren's hand. It was the first time he'd touched her outside of their required public appearances, and Lauren was surprised by how right it felt. "She's going to be okay," Lucas said quietly. "Your sister is the strongest person I've ever met, after you." Lauren squeezed his hand, unable to trust her voice, because sitting there in that sterile waiting room, holding hands with a man she'd married out of desperation, Lauren realized something that changed everything. She was falling in love with Lucas Ellington. Not the bitter, angry man he'd been when they met, but the person he was becoming. Generous, thoughtful, capable of genuine kindness. And that knowledge was both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to her. Frank Ellington prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves before they even knew they were making them. So when his private investigator delivered the report about Lucas's unauthorized $400,000 transfer to Johns Hopkins, Frank felt something he rarely experienced. Genuine surprise. His son was changing, not just superficially, but fundamentally. The Lucas who had lost $2 million in Vegas would never have spent his own money to help someone else, especially not the woman Frank had chosen to humiliate him. This new Lucas, the one who attended charity events without complaint, who spoke about Lauren with something approaching respect, who had quietly funded experimental cancer treatments, was becoming dangerously unpredictable. Frank stared out his office window at the Chicago skyline, calculating the marriage was supposed to have been a punishment, a year-long lesson in humility that would bring Lucas back under his control. Instead, it seemed to be having the opposite effect. His son was growing independent, making decisions without consultation, developing what appeared to be genuine feelings for his arranged wife. This could not be allowed to continue. The knock on his office door came at exactly 2 o'clock. As scheduled, Frank's assistant announced his visitor with professional efficiency. "Mrs. Lauren Whitfield to see you, sir." The woman who entered Frank's office was everything he'd requested from the executive recruiting firm. Blonde, beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious in a way that made her dangerous. At 32, Lauren Whitfield had carved out a reputation as one of Chicago's most ruthless corporate attorneys, someone who would do whatever it took to get what she wanted. "Mr. Ellington," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Thank you for seeing me. Ms. Whitfield, please sit." Frank gestured to the chair across from his desk. the same one where he'd made his devil's bargain with Lauren Hayes 5 months earlier. "I trust you've reviewed the materials my assistant sent over." "I have." Lauren Whitfield crossed her legs with calculated precision. Her designer suit and predatory smile a stark contrast to the simple dignity Lauren Hayes had brought to this same room. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious why someone of your reputation needs to hire outside help for what seems like a relatively straightforward matter." Frank smiled. He appreciated directness, especially when it served his purposes, because my son has developed an unfortunate attachment to his current wife, an attachment that threatens to interfere with his future role in this company. And you want me to discourage this attachment. I want you to remind him of what he's missing. Lucas has always been susceptible to beautiful, sophisticated women who understand his world. His current wife, while admirable in her way, lacks the polish and ambition that someone in his position requires. Lauren Whitfield's smile sharpened. "You want me to seduce him? I want you to present him with an alternative. Someone who shares his background, his education, his natural environment. Someone who could actually be a partner in building his empire rather than a charity case he's temporarily supporting." "And what exactly is in this for me, Mr. Ellington?" Frank had been waiting for this question. Lauren Whitfield was ambitious above all else. And ambition was something he understood perfectly. A position as chief legal counsel for Ellington Industries when Lucas takes over the company, full partnership track, equity stake, and access to the kind of clients and cases that make careers. Plus, of course, the personal satisfaction of landing one of Chicago's most eligible bachelors. The offer was generous, more generous than Lauren Whitfield deserved. But Frank knew that this particular problem required extreme measures. His son was slipping away from him, developing a moral compass that would interfere with the ruthless pragmatism required to run an empire. If emotional manipulation was what it took to bring Lucas back in line, then Frank was prepared to deploy it. "How long do I have?" Lauren Whitfield asked. "As long as it takes. But I'd prefer to see results sooner rather than later. Lucas and his wife are scheduled to attend the Marconi Foundation Gala next Friday. It would be an excellent opportunity for you to make his acquaintance." Lauren Whitfield stood, smoothing down her skirt with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly how attractive she was. "Consider it done, Mr. Ellington. Though I have to ask, what happens to the current Mrs. Ellington when I succeed?" "That," Frank said coldly, "is not your concern. Your job is to give Lucas better options. What he does with those options is up to him." The Marconi Foundation Gala was one of Chicago's premier social events. The kind of fundraiser where the wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy, while networking furiously behind champagne flutes and forced smiles. Lauren Hayes had grown to hate these events. The superficial conversations, the calculating looks, the way people's eyes would light up when Lucas introduced her, and then dim when they remembered she was the cleaning lady. But tonight felt different. Lucas had been more attentive lately, more present. Ever since Nora had started her treatment in Baltimore, something had shifted between them. The late-night conversations had become longer, more intimate. The careful distance they'd maintained for months was slowly dissolving into something that felt dangerously close to real affection. Lauren caught herself stealing glances at Lucas as they moved through the crowd at the Palmer House ballroom. He looked devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, but it was something else that made her pulse quicken. The way he'd started looking at her like she was someone worth protecting, worth caring about. "You're staring," Lucas murmured in her ear as they paused near the silent auction display. "Am I?" Lauren felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Very obviously. People are going to start thinking we actually like each other." The words were teasing, but there was something underneath them. A question, maybe even hope. Lauren was about to respond when a voice interrupted them. "Lucas Ellington. My God, is that really you?" They turned to find a stunning blonde woman approaching, her smile bright and predatory. She was everything Lauren wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, clearly from the same world of privilege that had shaped Lucas. The woman moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing every door would open for her. "I'm sorry," Lucas said politely, but Lauren caught the flicker of uncertainty in his expression. "Have we met? Lauren Whitfield?" The woman extended her hand, and Lauren noticed how long she held Lucas's grip. "We were at Northwestern together, though you probably don't remember. I was 2 years behind you in the business program." "Of course." Lucas said, though Lauren could tell he didn't actually remember. "Lauren, this is my wife. Lauren Hayes. Your wife." Lauren Whitfield's eyes widened with what looked like genuine surprise, though something about her expression seemed calculated. "How wonderful. When did you two meet?" Lauren felt Lucas tense beside her, the question hitting on the one topic they'd never figured out how to navigate in public. Their origin story was too complicated, too humiliating for both of them. "It's a bit of an unconventional story," Lucas said carefully. "The best ones always are," Lauren Whitfield said, her smile never wavering. "I'd love to hear it sometime, actually, Lucas. I was hoping to pick your brain about something. I'm working on a case that involves some of the same regulatory issues you dealt with in the Henderson acquisition. Could I steal you for just a moment?" Lauren watched helplessly as Lauren Whitfield maneuvered Lucas away from her, their conversation quickly becoming too technical and insider-focused for her to follow. She found herself standing alone near the silent auction, acutely aware of how out of place she looked among Chicago's elite. "Champagne!" A server appeared with a tray, and Lauren accepted a glass gratefully, using it as something to do with her hands. From across the room, she watched Lauren Whitfield work her magic. The woman was good, engaging Lucas in animated conversation about business strategies and mutual acquaintances, laughing at his responses with the kind of genuine appreciation that suggested they spoke the same language. They looked right together, Lauren realized with a sick feeling in her stomach. They belonged in the same world in a way that she and Lucas never would. When Lucas finally returned to her side 20 minutes later, something had changed in his expression. He seemed thoughtful, distracted in a way that made Lauren's chest tighten with anxiety. "She seems nice," Lauren said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Lauren Whitfield, yeah, she's accomplished, partner at Kellerman, Bass & Associates. They handle most of the major corporate litigation in the city. There was something in Lucas's tone, not attraction exactly, but a kind of recognition that made Lauren feel suddenly, desperately inadequate. Lauren Whitfield was what Lucas was supposed to want. Beautiful, successful, from his world, not a former cleaning lady with a sick sister and a teaching degree she'd never been able to use. "She remembered you from college," Lauren said. "Apparently, though I have to admit, I don't really remember her. Northwestern's business program was pretty competitive. Everyone was focused on getting ahead. They made it through the rest of the evening, but Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Lauren Whitfield had introduced a new variable into their carefully balanced equation, and Lauren wasn't sure their fragile relationship could survive the comparison. As they drove home through Chicago's empty streets, Lucas was quieter than usual. Lauren found herself studying his profile in the dim light from the dashboard, trying to read his expression. "Penny for your thoughts," she said finally. Lucas glanced over at her, and Lauren caught something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Uncertainty, confusion, the kind of look that suggested he was questioning everything he thought he knew. Just thinking about what Lauren said tonight, about opportunities, about the future. What kind of opportunities? Nothing specific. Just, it's been a long time since I talked to someone who understood the business world the way I do, someone who spoke the same language. The words hit Lauren like physical blows, each one confirming her worst fears. She turned to stare out the passenger window, blinking back tears she refused to let fall. Because in that moment, Lauren Hayes understood exactly what Lauren Whitfield represented. Not just competition, but a reminder of everything Lucas was giving up by staying married to her. And for the first time since their late-night conversations had begun, Lauren wondered if maybe Lucas was starting to realize what a poor bargain he'd made. The seeds Lauren Whitfield had planted at the Marconi Gala grew quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, she found reasons to contact Lucas. Business questions that required his expertise, invitations to professional networking events, casual lunches that she positioned as career development opportunities. Each interaction was perfectly calculated, designed to remind Lucas of the sophisticated, ambitious world he'd been born to inhabit. Lauren Hayes watched it all with growing dread. She noticed how Lucas's phone buzzed with increasing frequency, how his conversations became peppered with references to cases and deals she couldn't understand. Most devastating of all, she saw how he lit up when discussing these complex business matters, an intellectual excitement she'd never been able to inspire in him. The breaking point came on a gray February morning when Lauren was preparing to leave for the hospital. Nora's treatments in Baltimore were going well, but the process was grueling. requiring weekly trips and constant monitoring. Lauren had grown accustomed to Lucas's support during these visits, his quiet presence in waiting rooms, his ability to ask the right questions when doctors delivered complex updates. "I won't be able to come with you today," Lucas said, not looking up from his laptop. "Lauren has a client meeting that could benefit from my input on the regulatory aspects." Lauren? Not Lauren Whitfield, just Lauren, as if there was only one Lauren who mattered now. "Of course," Lauren said, trying to keep the hurt out of her voice. "Nora will understand." But Lucas was already absorbed in his screen, scrolling through what looked like legal documents. The dismissal was polite but complete, and Lauren felt something cold settle in her chest as she realized how easily she'd been replaced. The hospital visit was routine. Good news, actually, as Dr. Chen reported that Nora's latest scans showed continued improvement. But Lauren found herself unable to focus on the optimistic prognosis. Her mind stuck on the image of Lucas and Lauren Whitfield bent over documents together, speaking a language of ambition and success that she would never understand. When she returned to the mansion that evening, she found Lucas in his study with Lauren Whitfield. They were seated close together at his desk, her hand resting casually on his arm as she pointed to something on his laptop screen. The intimacy of the scene, professional but somehow personal, made Lauren's stomach clench. "How did it go with Nora?" Lucas asked, barely glancing up. "Good, Dr. Chen is very optimistic." Lauren hovered in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in her own home. "Sorry to interrupt." "Not at all," Lauren Whitfield said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was just leaving, Lucas. Thank you so much for your insights. You've been incredibly helpful." The look that passed between them lasted just a moment too long, and Lauren felt something crack inside her chest. This was how it started. The kind of connection she and Lucas had been building slowly, carefully, over months of late-night conversations. But Lauren Whitfield was accomplishing the same thing in weeks, with the advantage of speaking Lucas's native language of privilege and ambition. After Lauren Whitfield left, the house felt different. Lucas was distracted through dinner, checking his phone frequently and responding to messages with an energy Lauren hadn't seen in months. When she tried to initiate their usual evening conversation, he begged off, claiming he had work to finish, too. Lauren lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what was happening. She'd always known this marriage was temporary, that Lucas would eventually return to his real life, but she'd started to hope, foolishly maybe, that what had grown between them might be worth preserving beyond their contractual year. The evidence of her miscalculation arrived 3 days later in the form of a manila envelope slipped under her bedroom door while she was at the hospital. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, email printouts, and legal documents that made Lauren's blood run cold, according to the papers. Lauren Hayes had been systematically stealing money from the household accounts, small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, but escalating over time. The documents showed transfers to offshore accounts, fake receipts for medical expenses that had already been covered by insurance, and what appeared to be communications with a divorce attorney discussing a substantial settlement claim. The evidence was damning and detailed, painting Lauren as exactly the kind of opportunistic gold digger that Chicago society had whispered she might be. Every transaction was documented, every communication time-stamped and verified. It was also completely fabricated. Lauren stared at the papers with growing horror, recognizing just enough legitimate details, actual account numbers, real medical expenses, to understand how sophisticated this frame job was. Someone had gone to enormous trouble to construct this elaborate lie. Someone with access to private financial information and the technical expertise to forge convincing documentation. Her hands shaking, Lauren photographed each page with her phone, and then drove straight to Lucas's office. She found him in a meeting with potential investors, but the look on her face must have communicated the urgency of the situation, because he excused himself immediately. "Lauren, what's wrong?" She handed him the envelope without a word, watching his expression change as he flipped through the documents. Confusion gave way to shock, then to something that looked dangerously like disappointment. "Where did you get these?" His voice was carefully neutral, but Lauren could hear the distance creeping in. "Someone slipped them under my door. Lucas, none of this is true. I've never seen these accounts, never made these transfers. I don't even know how to set up offshore banking." Lucas continued reading, his expression growing more closed with each page. "These look pretty official. Bank letterheads, transaction records, because they're fake. Professional fakes, but fake nonetheless. Lauren felt panic rising in her throat. Someone is trying to destroy me, Lucas. Someone who wants you to believe I'm exactly what your father warned you I was. My father. Lucas looked up sharply. What does he have to do with this? I don't know, maybe nothing. But think about it. Who else would have access to our financial information? Who else would benefit from proving that I'm just a con artist who trapped you into marriage? Lucas set the documents on his desk, his movements deliberate and controlled. Lauren, I want to believe you, but this is incredibly detailed. Bank routing numbers, conversation transcripts with attorneys. If someone fabricated all this, they'd need resources and access that your father has. Lauren finished. Lucas, please, you know me. You know I would never do something like this. I married you to save my sister's life, not to steal money I never needed. But even as she said it, Lauren could see doubt creeping into Lucas's eyes. The careful trust they'd built over months was crumbling under the weight of expertly fabricated evidence. I need time to think about this, Lucas said finally, to have these documents authenticated, to understand what's really happening here. You need time to think about whether I'm a criminal. Lauren's voice cracked. After everything we've been through, after all the conversations, all the moments, you're actually questioning whether I'm capable of this. I'm questioning whether I really know you at all, Lucas said, and the words hit Lauren like physical blows. 6 months ago, you were a stranger my father forced me to marry. Now you're asking me to believe that someone has orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to frame you for financial fraud? Which scenario seems more likely? Lauren stared at him, seeing not the man who had held her hand in hospital waiting rooms or funded her sister's experimental treatment, but the suspicious, entitled heir she'd first met, Frank Ellington's son, trained from birth to trust no one and assume the worst about people's motivations. You're right, Lauren said quietly. 6 months ago, I was a stranger. I thought maybe that had changed. I thought we'd become something more. Lauren, no. It's fine. I understand. Lauren's voice was steady now, strengthened by heartbreak and resignation. You want to believe I'm capable of this because it's easier than admitting you might have actual feelings for someone beneath your social class. That's not fair, isn't it? This whole marriage was your father's way of teaching you a lesson about people like me. And maybe the lesson is sticking better than either of us realized. Lauren turned to leave, but Lucas's voice stopped her. What do you want me to do, Lauren? Ignore evidence because I've developed feelings for you. Pretend this doesn't exist because it's inconvenient. I want you to trust me, Lauren said without turning around. I want you to know me well enough to realize that I would never betray you like this. But if you can't do that, if 6 months of marriage means so little that you're ready to believe I'm a thief based on some documents that appeared mysteriously under my door. She paused, gathering the courage for what she had to say next. Then maybe we should just end this now. You can have your divorce, your freedom, your sophisticated lawyer friend who speaks your language and understands your world, and I'll figure out how to pay for Nora's treatments on my own. This time when she walked away, Lucas didn't try to stop her. Lauren made it to her car before the tears came, great shuddering sobs that felt like they might tear her apart, because in the space of 20 minutes, she'd lost not just her marriage, but her faith in the one person she'd started to believe might actually love her for who she was. And the worst part was that somewhere in her heart, a small voice whispered that maybe Lucas was right to doubt her. Maybe she really was just a cleaning lady who'd gotten in over her head, and everything she'd thought was growing between them had been nothing but wishful thinking. From the start, Lauren moved out of the Ellington mansion that same night, taking only the clothes she'd brought into the marriage and the few personal items that truly belonged to her. She left behind the designer dresses Frank had insisted she needed for social functions, the jewelry that had never felt like hers, and the credit cards that had always felt like golden chains. She found a small studio apartment in Portland, a neighborhood she'd always loved for its tree-lined streets and sense of community. The space was a fraction of the size of her room at the mansion, but it felt like freedom. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just honest hardwood and walls she could paint any color she wanted. The next morning, Lauren called Supreme Cleaning Services and asked for her old job back. Maria Santos was surprised but welcoming, and by that afternoon, Lauren was back in her familiar uniform, cleaning offices in buildings that seemed modest after months in the world of Chicago's elite. It should have felt like failure, a return to the life she'd been so desperate to escape. Instead, it felt like coming home. Lucas, meanwhile, fell into a routine of careful investigation and growing regret. The morning after Lauren left, he hired the best forensic accountants money could buy to authenticate the documents that had destroyed his marriage while he waited for their report. He threw himself into work with Lauren Whitfield, trying to lose himself in the familiar language of corporate strategy and legal maneuvering. But something felt wrong. Lauren Whitfield was everything he should want: brilliant, ambitious, sophisticated enough to navigate his world with ease. She understood his references, laughed at his insider jokes, and challenged him intellectually in ways that should have been exciting. Instead, Lucas found himself thinking about quiet moments in a hospital cafeteria, about late-night conversations in the kitchen, about the way Lauren Hayes had looked at her sister with such fierce, protective love. Lauren Whitfield could discuss merger strategies with surgical precision, but she'd never shown the kind of raw courage it took to sacrifice everything for family. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Lauren left, when Lucas's lead forensic accountant called with preliminary results. "Mr. Ellington, we've found several irregularities in these documents that suggest sophisticated forgery. The timestamps on the email communications don't match server logs. The bank routing numbers belong to institutions that don't offer the types of accounts described, and the signature analysis indicates multiple attempts to replicate Mrs. Ellington's handwriting." Lucas felt his stomach drop. "You're saying they're fake?" "Not just fake. Professionally fabricated. Whoever did this had significant resources and technical expertise. This was an amateur hour." After hanging up, Lucas sat in his office staring at the Chicago skyline and feeling like the world's biggest fool. Lauren had been telling the truth, and he'd been too proud and too damaged by years of his father's cynicism to trust the woman he'd come to love. Love. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He loved Lauren Hayes. Not the grateful charity case his father had intended her to be. Not the sophisticated trophy wife society expected him to want. But the fierce, genuine woman who read to sick children and fought for her sister's life with everything she had. And he'd thrown it all away because some documents had confirmed his worst fears about himself. That he wasn't worthy of genuine love. That anyone who claimed to care about him must have ulterior motives. Lucas was still processing this revelation when Lauren Whitfield appeared in his doorway. Immaculate as always in a tailored suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Lucas, you look terrible. Is everything all right?" "The documents were fake," Lucas said without preamble. "The evidence against Lauren, all of it was fabricated." Lauren Whitfield's expression flickered for just a moment, so briefly that someone who wasn't watching carefully might have missed it. But Lucas caught it. A flash of something that looked like panic before her professional mask slipped back into place. "That's surprising," she said carefully. "Do you know who might have done such a thing?" "I was hoping you might have some ideas," Lucas said, his voice deceptively casual. "You're the legal expert, after all, who would have the resources and motivation to frame my wife for financial fraud. I couldn't possibly speculate." "Lauren," Lucas's voice was sharp enough to cut glass, "I need you to be very careful with your next words because I'm starting to think you know more about this situation than you've let on." The facade cracked. Lauren Whitfield's perfect composure slipped, and Lucas saw something ugly underneath. Ambition without conscience, calculation without empathy. "Your father was concerned about your attachment," she said finally. "He thought you needed perspective about what kind of woman could truly be a partner in your future." The confession hit Lucas like a physical blow. "My father hired you to destroy my marriage. He hired me to open your eyes, that woman, your cleaning lady wife. She was never going to fit into your world. She was holding you back, making you weak and sentimental. I did you a favor." Lucas stood slowly, his movements controlled but his voice deadly quiet. "You fabricated evidence to convince me that my wife was a criminal. You destroyed the first real relationship I've ever had. And you call that a favor? Lucas, be realistic. What future did you really have with her? She's a nobody from nowhere, with no education, no connections, no understanding of what your life requires." "I can offer you so much more." "Get out. Excuse me. Get out of my office. Get out of this building. If I ever see you again, I'll have you disbarred for conspiracy and fraud. Now get out before I call security." Lauren Whitfield's mask slipped completely then, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "You're making a mistake, Lucas. Your father won't tolerate this kind of defiance forever, and that little wife of yours, she's probably already moved on to her next mark." After she left, Lucas sat alone in his office and tried to process the magnitude of what his father had done, not just the manipulation. That was familiar territory in the Ellington family, but the cruelty of it, the willingness to destroy an innocent woman's reputation just to maintain control over his son's life. That evening, Lucas drove to Frank's penthouse for a confrontation that was 28 years overdue. He found his father in his study, reading financial reports with the same cold concentration he brought to everything. Frank looked up when Lucas entered, and something in his son's expression made him set aside his papers. "I know what you did," Lucas said without preamble. "Lauren Whitfield, the forged documents, all of it." Frank's expression didn't change. "I assume you're referring to my attempt to help you see reason about your inappropriate attachment to that cleaning woman. Her name is Lauren Hayes. She's my wife, and she's worth 10 of you." "Your wife?" Frank's voice was dismissive. "A temporary arrangement that was supposed to teach you humility, not turn you into a sentimental fool." "The only thing you taught me," Lucas said, his voice shaking with controlled rage, "is that you're capable of destroying anything good in my life to maintain your control? Well, congratulations, Dad. You've finally pushed me too far." Lucas pulled out his phone and set it on Frank's desk, the screen showing a resignation letter addressed to the board of directors of Ellington Industries. "What is this?" "My resignation from the company, effective immediately. I'm also renouncing any claim to my inheritance, my trust fund, and the family name. I don't want anything that comes with strings attached to you." For the first time in Lucas's memory, Frank Ellington looked genuinely shocked. "You can't be serious. This company is your birthright, your legacy. This company is built on the same foundation as our relationship: manipulation, control, and the belief that people are just assets to be managed. I want no part of it." Lucas turned to leave, but Frank's voice stopped him. "Where will you go? What will you do? You've never worked a real day in your life." "Then I guess it's time I learned how," Lucas said. "Goodbye, Dad. Don't contact me again." 3 days later, Lucas arrived in Portland with nothing but a suitcase and a determination to win back the woman he'd lost. He found a small apartment 6 blocks from Lauren's, got a job as a volunteer coordinator at the same community center where she tutored children, and began the slow process of rebuilding his life from the ground up. He didn't approach Lauren directly. He wasn't sure he had the right to, after what he'd put her through. Instead, he threw himself into the work, learning what it meant to contribute something meaningful to the world, instead of just consuming resources. The children at the center reminded him of Lauren's students at Lincoln Elementary: bright, hopeful, resilient in the face of circumstances that would crush most adults. Working with them, Lucas began to understand what Lauren had tried to tell him about the value of education, about the power of believing in someone who'd never been given a chance. It took 2 months before Lauren acknowledged his presence. She was leaving the center after an evening tutoring session when she found him sitting on the front steps, looking exhausted, but somehow more real than she'd ever seen him. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" "Learning," he said simply. "Learning what it means to work for something that matters. Learning what you tried to teach me about the difference between having money and having purpose." Lauren studied his face in the amber glow of the streetlight. Gone was the polished veneer of privilege, replaced by something harder earned but more genuine. "I heard you left Ellington Industries." "I left everything. The company, the inheritance, the family name, all of it." "Why?" Lucas stood slowly, and Lauren was struck by how different he looked. Not just the casual clothes and slightly calloused hands, but something in his expression that suggested he'd found peace with himself. "Because I finally figured out what I want my life to mean," he said. "And it doesn't have anything to do with corporate empires or social status. It has to do with being worthy of someone who sacrificed everything for love." Lauren felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "Lucas, I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said quickly. "I know I failed you when you needed me to believe in you. But I'm not asking for a second chance with the person I was. I'm asking for a first chance with the person I'm trying to become." And for the first time in months, Lauren Hayes allowed herself to hope, 1 year later, the Portland Community Learning Center stood as proof that dreams could survive even the most impossible circumstances. What had begun as Lauren's vision during those dark hospital nights had grown into something neither she nor Lucas could have imagined when they first met as strangers, bound by desperation and pride. The building itself was modest, a converted warehouse in Portland's arts district that Lucas had helped Lauren find and renovate. But inside, magic happened daily. Bright murals painted by the students themselves covered the walls, depicting scenes of hope and possibility. Small classrooms buzzed with the energy of children discovering that learning could be joyful, that education was a gift rather than a burden. Lauren stood in the main hallway, checking last-minute details for the school's first anniversary celebration. In 12 months, they'd grown from a handful of volunteer tutors to a fully accredited learning center serving 60 children from kindergarten through 8th grade. The transformation had been remarkable, not just of the building, but of everyone involved. "Miss Lauren," called Marcus, now 8 years old and reading 3 grades above his level. "My mom brought those cookies you like for the party." Lauren smiled, accepting a somewhat lopsided hug from the boy who'd been one of their first students. Marcus had arrived barely able to write his name. Now he was devouring chapter books and dreaming of becoming a veterinarian. "That's wonderful, Marcus. Will you help me set up the tables?" As they worked together, Lauren caught sight of Lucas through the window of what they designated as the administrative office. He was bent over a desk covered with grant applications and budget spreadsheets. His sleeves rolled up, and his hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it. The transformation in him over the past year had been as remarkable as the school itself. Gone was the polished heir who'd treated their marriage like a prison sentence. In his place was a man who'd discovered the satisfaction of building something meaningful with his own hands. Lucas had thrown himself into the work of creating the school with an intensity that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd learned to write grant proposals, negotiate with contractors, and manage budgets that required careful consideration of every dollar. More importantly, he'd learned to connect with the children they served. Lucas had a particular gift for working with the older kids, the 10 and 11-year-olds who were too cool for enthusiasm, but not too cool to be hungry for someone who believed in their potential. He coached their basketball team, helped with science projects, and somehow managed to make algebra seem interesting. The reconciliation between Lauren and Lucas hadn't been immediate or easy. Trust, once broken, required careful rebuilding, but working side by side toward a common goal had given them something precious. A relationship based not on desperation or arrangement, but on shared values and genuine partnership. "Lauren," Lucas appeared in the doorway, holding an official-looking envelope. "This just came from the Department of Education." Lauren's stomach clenched. They'd been waiting for word on a federal grant that would allow them to expand their programming and hire additional certified teachers. The money would be life-changing for the school. But Lauren had learned not to count on miracles. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers, Lucas reading over her shoulder. The letter was formal and bureaucratic, but the key phrase jumped out at them both. "Pleased to inform you that your application has been approved for the full requested amount of $250,000. "We got it," Lauren whispered, then louder, "We got it." Lucas swept her into his arms, spinning her around the hallway while Marcus cheered and other children came running to see what the excitement was about. For a moment, the careful professional distance they'd maintained dissolved into pure joy. "What does this mean?" asked Aisha, now 8 and the school's unofficial spokesperson. "It means we can hire more teachers," Lauren explained, her voice bright with excitement. "It means we can add art and music programs. It means we can serve even more children." The celebration that evening was everything Lauren had hoped it would be. The warehouse filled with families, volunteers, and community supporters who'd watched the school grow from an impossible dream into a vital part of the neighborhood. Children who'd been shy and struggling a year ago now stood confidently to read their own poetry and display science projects they'd completed. But the most emotional moment came when Nora Hayes took the makeshift stage. At 17, Nora was healthy, vibrant, and preparing for her senior year of high school. The experimental treatments in Baltimore had worked beyond anyone's most optimistic projections, and she'd been in complete remission for 8 months. More than that, she'd grown into a poised young woman who carried herself with the quiet strength that came from surviving something that should have destroyed her. A year and a half ago, Nora began, her voice clear and strong. "My sister made a choice that changed all our lives. She married a stranger to save my life, and in the process, she saved his too." Lauren felt tears prick at her eyes as Nora continued. "This school exists because my sister believes that every child deserves what we almost lost, hope for the future. But it also exists because sometimes the most impossible situations lead to the most extraordinary outcomes." Lauren and Lucas didn't just create a school, they created a family, a community, a place where dreams come true every single day. The applause was thunderous, but Lauren barely heard it. She was watching Lucas, seeing the emotion in his eyes as he looked between her and Nora, somewhere along the way. He'd become part of their small family, not because of a contract or arrangement, but because love had a way of growing in the most unexpected places. After the formal program ended and families began heading home, Lauren found herself on the school's small rooftop garden, looking out over the Portland skyline. The city sparkled in the evening light, and she could hear the distant sound of children's laughter from the playground below. "Quite a year," Lucas said, joining her at the railing. "Quite a year," Lauren agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them here. From that first devastating meeting in Frank Ellington's office to this moment of triumph, they'd traveled further than either could have imagined. "I got a letter from my father," Lucas said suddenly. Lauren tensed. Frank Ellington had been conspicuously absent from their lives since Lucas's dramatic break from the family empire. She'd sometimes wondered if he would eventually try to reassert control over his son. "What did he say?" "Nothing direct, but he's been visiting the school." Lauren stared at him in shock. "What do you mean, visiting?" "Apparently, he's been coming by on Saturday mornings when we do the community breakfast program. Maria in the kitchen mentioned an older gentleman who helps serve food but never talks to anyone. Always leaves a substantial cash donation, never gives his name." Lauren tried to process this information. Frank Ellington, the cold, calculating man who'd manipulated their lives so ruthlessly, volunteering at their community center. "How long has this been going on?" "Maria says about 3 months. He just shows up, works for a couple hours, leaves money, and disappears." Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. Lauren's eyes widened when she saw the amount. $50,000, made out to the Portland Community Learning Center. The signature at the bottom read simply F. Ellington. "He included a note," Lucas said, handing her a small card. "Just one line. For the children, no strings attached." Lauren stared at the check, trying to reconcile this gesture with everything she knew about Frank Ellington. It wasn't an apology. Frank was too proud for that. But it was something else. Something that might be recognition, or even regret. "What are you going to do?" Lauren asked. "Cash it," Lucas said without hesitation. "If my father wants to contribute to something meaningful for once in his life, I'm not going to stop him, but I'm not going to thank him for it either," as if summoned by their conversation. A familiar figure appeared in the parking lot below. Even from a distance, Frank Ellington was unmistakable. Tall, imposing, moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered, but something about his posture seemed different, less imperious than Lauren remembered. Frank looked up at the building, and for a moment, Lauren thought he might have seen them on the rooftop, but he simply stood there for a long moment, observing the school his money had helped create, before walking away into the Portland night. "Do you think he's really changed?" Lauren asked. "I think," Lucas said carefully, "that people can surprise you, even when you think you know them completely." He turned to face her fully, and Lauren saw something in his expression that made her heart race. Not the desperate passion of their early reconciliation, but something deeper and more stable. "Lauren, I have something to ask you." "What?" Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lauren's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple solitaire diamond. Nothing ostentatious or showy, just beautiful and real. "Our marriage started with a contract," Lucas said, his voice soft but steady. "It was about desperation and manipulation, and two people who had no choice but to trust each other. But what we've built together, the school, this life, this love, that's not about contracts or arrangements. That's about choice." He dropped to one knee on the rooftop, and Lauren felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "Lauren Hayes, will Will you marry me? Not because we have to, not because anyone else wants us to, but because I choose you and you choose me, every single day for the rest of our lives. Through her tears, Lauren could see their students' artwork visible through the classroom windows below, could hear the faint sounds of the community they'd built together, could feel the weight of all the dreams they'd made real through love and determination. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Lucas, I choose you too. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lauren thought about the impossible journey that had brought them here. What had begun as the worst night of Lucas's life, losing $2 million in Vegas, had ultimately led to the greatest treasure either of them could imagine. A love worth fighting for, a purpose worth living for, and a future they'd built together with their own hands. Sometimes Lauren reflected as Lucas kissed her under the Portland stars. The most beautiful stories began with the most broken beginnings, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, love really could conquer everything, even the cynical manipulations of Frank Ellington.